Tonight's Late Show is dedicated to one of the leading lights of the opera world, Jessie Norman. She'll be talking face-to-face with Jeremy Isaacs at 11:30.
In our family, we have a tradition.
When a property developer is investigated for fraud, he finds his life is in turmoil.
This looks to me like blackmail.
It looks to me like corruption.
You think I'm guilty?
Are you?
What is your relationship with Stephen Crow?
People are shocked not by him, but the sentence.
A surge of anger leads to anarchy inside the prison system.
Prison is absurd.
But they can't believe
They can believe anything, they can do anything. They have their own trials, make their own rules.
Underbelly, a powerful new drama beginning next Monday at 9:30 on 2.
Now on to Peter Snow takes a detailed look at the day's news events.
We will potentially replace the Cold War with a trade war. And if we have a trade war, we don't have to go back too far in history to see what that leads to. A lot of uncertainty.
Good evening. America's Vice President Dan Quayle warns what will happen if the current world trade talks break down. But he hastens to deny the impression he seemed to have given earlier that failure could lead to America reconsidering its commitment to the defense of Europe. In a wide-ranging interview with Newsnight, he talks tough about Saddam and Gaddafi, but he admits it's an awkward job being vice president. Also tonight, health is back at the centre of the pre-election campaign. We examine the way budget-holding doctors in Hertfordshire are already changing the face of healthcare and creating what is beginning to look to some like a two-tier NHS. The Health Minister, Virginia Bottomley, and her Labour shadow, Harriet Harman, are with me to discuss the effects of the change. And scientists say they're close to unlocking the secret of why we age, wither and die. Could the countdown to death eventually be slowed down or even stopped? But first, the end game in the world trade negotiations under the GATT, the Geneva Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, is almost as rowdy a business as the pre-election campaign here at home. Already, President Bush has accused Europe of trying to set up an iron curtain of protection, and transatlantic relations are more venomous than they've been for some time. The 5-year-old trade negotiations reach their climax just as America throws itself into the presidential election. And American politicians, including Vice President Dan Quayle, were at a conference in Munich yesterday at which harsh words were said not just about the trade talks, but about America's readiness to continue defending Europe. Even the Vice President himself was thought by some Europeans there to have hinted that America would reconsider its troop commitment to NATO if the trade talks collapsed. What Mr. Quayle actually said at the conference was that security and trade were linked. He said the success of the GATT talks was critical to the security of Europe.
Friends, we have got to get on with it. We have to conclude the Uruguay round of this GATT negotiation.
Some of his Republican colleagues went further. They questioned whether there was now any need for America to defend Europe at all. What mattered, they said, was trade.
It appears that trade may be a far more significant issue than NATO itself.
The troops are, of course, already going home. In the last few weeks, America's so-called Spearhead, 3rd Armored Division, has lowered its flag and bowed out. President Bush wants to halve the 300,000 troops who were in Europe little more than a year ago. But some, even in his own party, were telling the weekend conference that they would cut far deeper.
There's a lot of talk in Congress about 50 or 60,000 as our level, and we'll probably end up with a forward group of maybe 30 to 50,000 troops in Europe permanently, but the days of big American presence is over.
Are you ready for a president who will declare a peace dividend? And
some Democrats questioned the commitment altogether. Tom Harkin, campaigning in Iowa for tonight's caucuses, has told audiences there that if people reckon Europe is already rich and strong enough to look after itself, then they should vote for him.
I'm Tom Harkin, and I'm running for president.
More immediately threatening than Mr. Harkin is the prospect of America playing extra tough in the GATT trade negotiations, which resume in the next few days. The sticking point is food. Both Europe and the United States want more access for farm products like wheat, but each accuses the other of protecting its farmers. Tempers are frayed, and the temptation for Bush and Quayle to score points in the election race may have been behind the Vice President's apparent hint that defense commitments could be linked to a deal on trade.
If the trade war that is developing over the GATT thing goes on, there's going to be a lot of hard feelings, and American taxpayers really want the trade thing to go forward, the GATT agreement. If it doesn't, I could see the time that there could be a total pullout of U.S. troops.
I certainly agree there is a danger of any failure to achieve settlement in GATT, leading to a rise in protectionism both in America and probably in Europe and elsewhere. And that's a great danger, and anything that can be done to alert people to that danger and make us aware of the need for an early settlement is important. But I'm not sure that it's particularly helpful to link security and trade matters, especially if it antagonizes the very people in Europe who are least eager for a settlement.
Today's send-off for the first American consignment of relief for Russia highlights another bit of North Atlantic friction. Germany has already sent 300 plane loads, and Europeans like the German Foreign Minister Mr. Genscher believe that James Baker's launch in Frankfurt this morning of what he calls Operation Provide Hope is an attempt to reassert American leadership in an area in which Europe is already way out in front. But all this is a long way from the New Hampshire primary campaign, where foreign commitments of any kind don't score many points with the voters. This is a battle on the economy, in which George Bush is fighting off a harsh attack from his own right, which accuses him of breaking promises.
It was not some liberal Democrat who declared, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and then broke his word to cut a seedy backroom deal with the big spenders on Capitol Hill.
Dan Quayle has done his bit of tub-thumping too, and already people are looking at him in a new light. Not exactly as a political heavyweight, but what weight he has, he's starting to throw around. And America's relations with Europe could be on the receiving end. Well, earlier this evening I spoke to the American Vice President at the American Ambassador's residence in London, and I began by asking him whether he really wanted to give the impression that America's troop commitment to Europe depended on the success of the GATT talks.
Absolutely not. And there has been some misinterpretation of what I said and juxtaposed to what members of Congress said. So let me put it in perspective for you.
You did say, forgive me interrupting, but you did say, didn't you, that economic security was linked to military security?
Absolutely, and it is. Economic security is linked to national security.
What do you mean by that if you don't mean that your commitment to NATO is linked to the success of these talks?
Look, the health of the United States is important. The health of Great Britain is important. The stronger that we are economically, the stronger we can be militarily. Our economy is linked to our military strength and our national security. There is linkage, but there is no linkage to the successful conclusion of the GATT negotiations with what the level of troops are going to be in Europe, in specific to NATO. Saturday, a number of members of Congress, some of my party, some of the other party, indicated that they were going to try to take the President beyond the 150,000 commitment that we have agreed to. I can assure you that the President of the United States will resist that. We're in a post-Cold War era. We have less tensions today, though problems. And if we don't pass the GATT negotiations, what the members of Congress were really saying is that then the potential of protectionism will raise its ugly head. I don't necessarily agree to the degree, I don't agree with them that protectionism is alive and well in the United States of America. In some districts, in some states, that is true. But overall, you have first a president that is very committed to free and fair trade and is not a protectionist.
He's saying some pretty tough things about protectionism in Europe, isn't he? He said the other day, your president, that he thinks that the European community is setting up an iron curtain of protectionism. Well, that's pretty coloured language, isn't it?
That is language that is directed to a potential problem that we may have if, in fact, Europe becomes a fortress Europe. We don't mind, we want to see a strong...
Is that the way you think it's going?
I hope that a united Europe means, one, a strong Europe. That's in our interest. But I hope a united Europe means an open Europe, not a closed Europe. But I know, and I've been in Europe now this past week, there are strong senses and feelings that we've got to protect our farmers and we have to protect this group.
That's what they say about you too, you know. They say you want to protect your farmers too much, and that's the problem.
I want to protect our farmers, and I want to protect the farmers here in Great Britain, and I want to protect the farmers in France, but the best way to protect the farmers in Europe, and the best way to protect the farmers in America, and the best way to protect the farmers in Japan is to allow open, free trade and get away from these exorbitant subsidies, both internally and externally.
Now, Mr. Vice President, what if the talks break down? Will you then be ready to fight a really vicious trade war with the agricultural products that you can subsidize and flood the world with and compete with Europe?
Well, if the talks break down, and they're not going to break down, Prime Minister John Major's not going to let them break down. President George Bush isn't going to
You're more confident than many ministers we've heard talk here.
I met with Chancellor Kohl last night. These talks are not going to break down. The question is whether we can come to an agreement. They are not going to meet an impasse and quit talking. The question is when can we come to an agreement? What will that agreement be? Because let me just say this for the record, that if we keep talking and talking and talking, then you do have more potential for protectionism, higher tariffs, more subsidies. And that is not in the best interest of Europe. It is not in the best interest of America.
But what sort of war will you fight if it does break down?
Well, as I said, we're not going to let the talks break down. Let's hope we never get there. But if, in fact, you cannot successfully conclude these negotiations, then I think we're going to have potentially some very serious economic problems. And we will potentially replace the Cold War with a trade war. And if we have a trade war, we don't have to go back too far in history to see what that leads to. A lot of uncertainty.
Now, against that background of you warning of the danger of us replacing the Cold War with a trade war, are you not facing growing isolationism in America anyway? And although you say you are determined to keep those troops in Europe, is there not powerful pressure, which would be reinforced were it not if these talks broke down, for you to leave Europe to go its own way?
This isolationist feeling, yes, it is a feeling in some sectors. But let me tell you how successful presidential candidates are that talk about isolation and protectionism. None of them have been even successful in their own respective parties. We have an attack from the right in the Republican Party in the presidential campaign right now. Isolation and protectionism. I'll predict right now he will not do very well in the overall campaign.